All right, hopefully this goes a little bit quicker than the last one that I tried to do that quit unexpectedly, and now I have to re-record this. But what I want to do in this final little lecture test prep is I'd like to get you ready for not only reading the passage that you have to answer for the AP test and understanding the prompt, but more importantly, starting to organize and get ready to write your essay. So this is something that we have been practicing through the analysis paragraphs for a really long time, but I just want you to see how the analysis paragraph is going to transfer over into the writing of these essays. So because we have been going through and using the 2018 prompt for question 2, the prose question, I'm going to return to that one for my example. And then if you would like to earn a little bit of extra credit and do some test prep, I'm going to leave you with a different year free response question that you can respond to on your own. So this is, again, returning to the prompt about Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel and the exchange that occurs between two characters, a narrator and a girl named Zenobia. Overall, the prompt is asking us, in a well-written essay, analyze how Hawthorne portrays the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia through the use of literary techniques. So, a couple things to consider here. As I pointed out with yesterday's example of how to understand the prompt, here what is being asked is essentially, through reading this passage, first of all, we have to identify what is the narrator's attitude. Attitude is a word that can be kind of synonymous with tone. So in other words, this is a first-person narration. So what does the tone of this narrator seem to be towards Zenobia? Since we're talking about tone, we know from class that tone is either complementary, it stays the same throughout, right? So you would need to say his attitude is at first this, and then by the end is still this, or it's contrasting, meaning it starts one way and ends up a different way. Okay, this prompt also alludes to the fact that in order to do this analysis, we're going to need to understand certain literary techniques, which is why I said something that I would put on the notes sheet that I have with me for the AP test tomorrow is maybe like a stock list of literary techniques. So if any don't come to me as I'm reading, I'll have a list that I can refer back to and kind of say, okay, well, I know I at least saw these two things. I saw tone, I saw diction. So this is the specific prompt that I'm going to have us look at as far as to figure out how to organize a response. On your own, you can go through, because I've attached the document, and you can read through the passage. Step 1, when you open up the AP test tomorrow, would be to make sure you understand what the prompt is asking you. It's not a bad idea to jot it down next to you. This is what they're asking. All right. Step 2 is to closely and carefully read and annotate the passage. So because you won't have it in front of you to write with necessarily on paper, again, I would have a notes sheet so that you can jot down as you go, okay, there's irony in line 5. They're mentioning this about her in line 10. Because they will give you the line numbers for whatever passage you're looking at tomorrow. Something that I would also recommend, and we did this during the poetry unit, but if you're given a passage like this, even though they give you line numbers, something else I might annotate on the side or on your notebook is how many paragraphs there are total. Just because when it comes to actually outlining the essay, you're not necessarily like a poem going to want to say, well, in lines 1 through 20, all right, if that breaks up a paragraph. So you might say, okay, just eyeballing this essay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I would say we've got 6 paragraphs total here. I'm going to group all that dialogue into one. So 6 paragraphs total. So that gives you another way as you're going through and annotating, whether it's putting down, this is what happens in paragraph 1, but just making yourself actively read. Now, I don't think that you should read it and then take notes on it. Annotating, especially the way you guys are going to have to do it by looking at a screen and writing on a piece of notebook paper, is something that you do while you read because it's an active reading strategy. Okay, so we read through this passage. We understand the prompt is asking us to interpret what is the narrator's tone. And you can probably pick up, even if you just skim this, that his tone changes or his attitude changes. So the way that he feels about Zenobia initially is not the same way he feels by the end. So that gives us now how we can go about writing our thesis statement. So, oops, wrong one. All right. So I'm going to come here now to the sample responses and scoring commentary for question 2. And if you did this workshop with me in January, you remember we kind of went through some of these. So I always recommend with these scoring commentaries, if you're going to look at some for other essays, go to the last couple pages. Go to where they give you the actual scores. So these essays are a little bit different than the ones we've been looking at because now the AP College Board has a different rubric. It's a 6-point rubric that you guys are very familiar with versus this one. So even though this is using a rubric of 9, you can still kind of gauge what is a good essay, what is a mediocre essay, and what is an essay that needs improvement. So we're going to look at 2. We're going to look at a low example of an essay and kind of a high example of an essay. And I always like to start with a lower example of an essay just because it gives you kind of it would be like a ladder. You know that you can get your footing and hit at least this, and then you can kind of see what you have to work your way up towards. So we're going to look at the first essay, which earned a score of 2. And you'll notice this one is a page. Now, there's not necessarily a correlation between the length of the essay and the score it receives. However, more often than not, shorter essays tend to really receive lower scores because they're lacking things, not because they're short. So if you've been doing great work in class for me, your essays aren't that long, but you've been getting good scores, that's because even though it's short, you get to the point and you have great analysis. These, as you'll see, are lacking analysis, which is why they're not longer, and that's why they're receiving lower scores. So the first thing that I'm going to point out in this one, and I noted it on the bottom, it says cron, is there are 2 ways that I would recommend going about writing these essays. So and when you're getting ready to write, before you actually begin writing, take 2 minutes and kind of outline how you're going to go about writing this. So most of you could do these introductions in your sleep. You know you need title, author, and an arguable statement that answers the prompt. Once it gets down to actual body paragraphing, though, here's where we might need a little bit of guidance. So the first thing that I would say is this is an example of how you would organize an essay that chronologically works through a prompt. So what that means is, I said it would probably help you if you organize this by paragraphs. So the passage you're going to refer to as 6 paragraphs. This person organizing it chronologically might choose to say each body paragraph is going to cover 1 paragraph of the passage. Or if you don't like that, you could divide it up into quarters, or you could divide it up in half. The first 3 paragraphs, the final 3 paragraphs. All right. So this one works through chronologically. So each of the body paragraphs spans a different chunk of that passage. All right, so here's your first way that you can organize it. Now, let's look at the thesis statement or the introduction. In the excerpt of Hawthorne's novel, the narrator, through the use of descriptive detailing and shifting tone, is able to portray an attitude of attractiveness, curiosity, and intended disapproval towards Zenobia. All right, so the one thing that I would say is this person did manage to, in a way, integrate the title and author. Okay, because we don't know the name of the novel. You know, some of these will just say Hawthorne's novel, or they'll say Hawthorne's 1852 novel. All right, so they covered that. There are some spelling errors, as you can tell, which are going to ultimately hurt this one. But they do point out 2 different literary devices that they're going to analyze in order to show us this attitude that the narrator has. Descriptive detailing and shifting tone. So another thing I would say that this person has going for him is that there's an adjective before. So it's not just through details and tone, right? It's descriptive details, shifting tone. These are not the most specific adjectives, but at least they're there. All right, so the next part, an attitude of attractiveness, curiosity, and intended disapproval. Since we're talking about tone, one thing that stands out to me is that this person didn't necessarily say the attitude stays the same throughout the passage or the attitude changes throughout the passage. So that would be a mark against it, is the thesis isn't super specific here. However, if we were going to look at this with the rubric that we are familiar with, I would argue that this would probably get the thesis point because it does give us something arguable. It tells us that the attitude is one of attractiveness, curiosity, and disapproval. So they did come up with an arguable thesis statement. All right, as we get into the body paragraphs, you know that through the analysis paragraphs I've been talking to you guys about, that we've been aiming to kind of organize our body paragraphs by starting with a topic sentence that is not just a transition or introducing an example, but that starts to focus the paragraph, followed by evidence, and followed by analysis. So if we look at our first body paragraph, it says, in the beginning, the narrator starts by describing a luxurious room that represents Zenobia. Okay, so right off the bat, no topic sentence. It's basically a summary of what the first part of this passage is about, a room. So I would say we're already kind of starting off at not a very great place analytically. It follows up by saying the narrator utilizes a plethora of details of that room, which seem to portray the superficial characteristics of Zenobia. So this we might say is a really nice observation. However, you say there's a plethora of details, but there is no evidence given. There are no quotes, whether they're embedded or, just a really long, multiple line spanning thing. There are no quotations here. Okay, so that's another thing that's going to hurt this person's overall score. All right. Finally, it ends with, as the characteristics depict fanciness and beauty, the narrator feels attracted to Zenobia. So we've got, and I've said this to some of you about your paragraphs, we've got a couple of observations that this person is making about the text, but an observation is not analysis. Analysis comes with the how and the why. How does this description of the room have anything to do with Zenobia? Why does this description of the room mean that the narrator finds her attractive? How does he feel about the room? So there is no analysis, no evidence. It's essentially just, here's a statement that I'm making, an arguable statement, and I'm not going to back it up with anything. All right. The next paragraph that begins with the lines 19 to 21 kind of goes along the same way, except for this time we have evidence. There is no topic sentence. It's just telling us in lines 19 to 21. All right. And it says, it costs me, and then it lists a 3-line quote. Now, this is better than no quote at all, but we've been working on embedding quotes and really focusing in on only using the parts of quotations that will best support your argument. So this one I would say, yeah, at least it's there, but it's not necessarily good because it's a long 3 lines that is only, 1-page essay, and 3 lines of it are now taken up with a quote. All right, so following the quote, it says, this quote implies a shift from the attractive tone towards a curious tone. Likewise, the narrator's attitude changes. So again, we've got that observation. There's a shift from attractive to curious, and no explanation of why that happened or how that happened. All right, our final 2 paragraphs, you can tell just by looking at the beginnings, they don't have a topic sentence. They begin with specifically different parts in lines 77 to 80 in the last paragraph. You'll also notice there's no quotes. And if you read through it, again, there's not an analysis there. It's essentially just saying, this is what happens in line 77 to 80. This is what happens in the last paragraph. Now, one little caution I will throw in before we return to the scoring comments is you'll notice that this person jumps from lines 21 to 77, meaning they basically said that there is nothing in lines 22 to 76 that is of note here. One thing to watch out for if you do organize this chronologically is make sure you're covering the full scope of the passage. So maybe don't break it down every paragraph unless there's something in every paragraph you plan on talking about. Maybe you break it down into thirds or quarters or half, because if I'm a reader, I'm going to say this person either didn't understand what was in lines 22 to 76 or didn't pay it close enough attention to think that it actually merited any observation and analysis. All right, so returning back down to the scoring summary, we can see some of the things I highlighted. Overall, I would say this essay, its biggest failure is that it's a bunch of observations and summaries without any analysis. The scoring commentary calls it unacceptably brief. I would agree. There's little clarity, meaning they make these statements and they don't back anything up. It relies largely on plot summary rather than analysis. It has speculative claims without textual support, aka observation without analysis. And then at the end, it says this is why it earned a score of 2. Several writing weaknesses, but it does respond to the prompt and show an understanding of the attitude. And then it says how it could be improved. So if this were on the rubric that is going to be used this year, I would say this person gets definitely a 1 for the thesis. It probably doesn't earn the sophistication point because of the writing errors and the spelling errors. And then if the 4 points are left on the table for analysis and evidence, because of the lack of evidence and analysis, I would say at most it earns 1 point in that category. So this essay would maybe be a 2 out of 6 on the rubric we're used to, maybe a 1 out of 6. All right, the one we're going to look at next is the first one, which is earned a score of 7. So it's not perfect because this is on, again, a rubric of 9, a rubric of 9. So this is not a perfect essay, but we'll see, first of all, it's 3 pages, so it's longer. Again, not indicative because it's not perfect, but let's see what we've got here. So responding to the same prompt, this essay begins with, in an 1852 novel, Nathaniel Hawthorne used a short scene between 2 characters to display the narrator's attitude towards the other character. All right, so my first thing is, yes, we've got title and author. This person also chose to add in a little bit of context that was given in the prompt. You can do that. If you're someone that is sparse with words, I would say, this is kind of repetitive because you're already going to tell what the attitude is in the next sentence. So maybe you don't need that context. But if it helps you and you feel like that's a good bridge that adds flow to your writing, by all means, just beware of being wordy. All right, so the main sentence of this introduction is, with a first-person perspective, lavish imagery, and probing dialogue, the prose establishes the narrator's initial bewilderment and later disdain for the second character, Zenobia. All right, so some of you enjoy using a thesis map. In other words, stating in your introduction what you will discuss in the rest of the essay. This one is not organized chronologically. I'm going to give you a little spoiler and say that this thesis map outlines the body paragraphs. So the first body paragraph will be about point of view. The second body paragraph will be about imagery. The last body paragraph will be an analysis of dialogue. So this person has chosen to include those things in the introduction. Something else that's a positive, we can see that there is an adjective or a descriptor before each literary device. So first person perspective, lavish imagery, probing dialogue. So that's another strength that helps it avoid being vague. Finally, this person responds to the prompt by explaining that there is a shift in the narrator's attitude or tone, right? Initial bewilderment and later disdain. So this checks all of the boxes. It is an arguable thesis. If you wanted to say, well, okay, if it seems great, why didn't it get a 9? I would say it's still kind of missing that so what. What caused the shift in the narrator's attitude from bewilderment to disdain? If that was elaborated on, that maybe would make this a little bit more complex in terms of the analysis or the thought. All right, so we're not going to look at the entire essay. I'm going to attach this to you on Classroom so that you can look through it if you would like, but we'll look at least at the first couple of paragraphs. So going back to our analysis paragraph format, we know that an essay should begin with or body paragraph should begin with a topic sentence followed by elaboration and examples, and then analysis. So our first sentence of this body paragraph is, the first person perspective helps to convey the narrator's vacillating opinion of Zenobia. All right, so we have a topic sentence. Not only do they introduce, first person perspective, but they also say why that's important, because it conveys the vacillating opinion, okay? This person didn't say the first thing that establishes attitude is perspective. That would be a no topic sentence, a really weak transition. Here we have a successful topic sentence. All right, the next part of this paragraph reads, as the prose develops, the narrator's attitudes towards Zenobia progresses from her manner, bewildering him, to him accepting how fit it was that she should make herself as gorgeous as she pleased, to her irritating him with her condescending, qualified, and approved criticism of the commune that he lived on. So 3 embedded quotes here. A couple things to address with that. Number 1, great how we have multiple quotes embedded and not just these long lines of, complete sections taken out of the passage, but instead carefully chosen examples. Now, one thing to note is if you're wondering what these little brackets are here and the quotation marks, if you're embedding quotes and you need the quote to fit into your sentence successfully, you can insert words into the quote that aren't actually in the passage if you surround them with these brackets. And then the second thing that might come up is you'll notice that there are no parenthetical citations. Now, it's kind of a up to you thing. If you have time to note what lines these quotes came from, that would be great. You can put them at the end of the quote, in parentheses. If they all come from the same lines, you can add it in. His attitude towards Zenobia progresses in line 21 from blah, 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 blah. However, it's not 100% necessary, and you would never have to put the author's name in those parentheticals because it's a given that since you're using the passage, you're going to be talking about a quote from Hawthorne. Okay, so we have a topic sentence, we have an example. What should be following here, because we know from our analysis paragraph, is analysis. So after this section with the quotes, we have these thoughts and reactions are opened up to the audience, displaying not only the final attitude of the speaker towards Zenobia, but also how he develops it. First person perspective taps into the mind of the narrator or to explicitly reveal his attitude towards her. Not the strongest. I put Lil V here because it's a little vague in its analysis, but it does follow up the quote by explaining or attempting to explain something that relates it back to the thesis. Okay. All right. I highlighted in the next two paragraphs, you can see that we begin with a topic sentence. Furthermore, lavish imagery helps to cement the narrator's bewilderment and eventual disdain. Good topic sentence. Also that transition word with furthermore, and they have the same thing at the end. Lastly, the probing dialogue between the narrator and Zenobia helps flesh out the narrator's feelings. So these you will see are organized very similarly to where we have a topic sentence, we have quotes, and then we also have analysis. If you choose to read through here specifically more of the analysis, you'll see that some of it is superficial. It could go further. And then I want to bring us back. Now, with these, you don't necessarily need a conclusion. This would be an example of a conclusion that I think just repeats the thesis, and so I would scratch it. I think it ultimately hurts it having this in here rather than just ending it beforehand. Because you can see if we just jump up to the second to last or the last sentence, the second last sentence in the entire essay, this person includes the combination of techniques helps the audience clearly understand the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia. So kind of vague, but that could wrap up the essay. That could end it. Instead, this person chooses to tack on through first person perspective, imagery, and dialogue. So repeating the thesis map, Hawthorne portrays the narrator's bewilderment and irritation towards Zenobia. Essentially, it's copying and pasting the thesis. I would say that this overall hurts the essay more than helps it. It detracts from it because it just makes it needlessly repetitive and a little vague. All right, so if we go down now to the scoring commentary before we end this, it says, just some things I picked out. It's a reasonable analysis of how Hawthorne portrays the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia through the use of literary techniques. It identifies the devices that are analyzed, and it notes the complexity of the narrator's attitude. Throughout the essay, it maps the progression of this attitude. So it does say specifically kind of what this essay does well. However, this is an essay that I think it would merit because it's not perfect, looking at the end where it talks about what it could do better. While the essay presents ideas clearly and with good attention to textual detail and language appropriate to the discussion of prose, it is not as persuasive as it might be. When it introduces point of view, close analysis of diction, word choice, could help to develop more exact conclusions about the narrator's state of mind. All right, so it tells you specifically what could be done to improve this. On our essay rubric, I would say this one maybe doesn't get the sophistication point because while the writing is good, the sophistication of ideas isn't necessarily there, but it might get up to a 3 on the analysis. So this one might get a 4 out of 6 overall on our current AP rubric. All right, so these two things are attached for you on the post. And hopefully, if you want to look at more, as far as like more examples, you can come to the AP Literature and Composition past exam questions, literally type that into Google, and it'll take you to this page, or it'll bring up this page, and you can look at what the free response questions were for any year, and then you would want to look at the sample responses for question 2, because that's the prose question you'll be answering. So if you choose to do any more test prep and you just kind of want to poke around, this is where I would kind of advocate for you poking around. All right, I will put this specifically on the Google Classroom post, but if you would like another chance at earning up to 30 points of extra credit, what I would say is this is the 1996 Prose question from the AP exam. I would say I would like you to read it, read the prompt, closely read the passage, and then I would like you to submit to me an outline of how you would write this essay. So in other words, I would expect for you to earn 30 points that you have a thesis statement that includes title, author, and an arguable response to the prompt, and then how you would organize your body paragraphs. If you organize it chronologically, what specifically are you talking about? If you organize it by literary device, which specific literary devices will you use? Now, one final note. This is one of those exams questions where they give you examples of things you could discuss. If you see those, that is not the end all be all. Those are suggestions. You will not lose points if you do not write about the devices that they give you. If you cannot find those devices, don't worry about it. Do the ones that make sense or that stand out to you. All right. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more to go off of. I hope that this is sufficient test prep for you. If you have any other questions, please feel free to email me. All right. Good luck, guys.